All right, let's jump right in. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating concept: why strictly following rules actually simplifies business success. But to really wrap our heads around how business works, we actually need to zoom out for a second and look at a chessboard. Imagine two of the absolute smartest men in human history sitting down to play a game of chess. You'd expect this epic, monumental battle of intellect, right? Well, grab your notebooks because the historical hook I'm about to share with you completely shatters that expectation, and it perfectly sets the stage for everything we're going to cover today.
Picture this. It's 1933, and Albert Einstein and J. Oppenheimer sit down to play a recorded game of chess. We actually have the logs, so you can go look up their exact moves. Think about this. You have the inventor of the atomic bomb and the guy responsible for some of the greatest physics discoveries of all time facing off. Now imagine putting them up against a hypothetical, just moderately trained 10-year-old chess student. Here is the shocking truth from our source material. If that kid had sat down to play those two towering geniuses, the 10-year-old would have absolutely wiped the floor with them. The game Einstein and Oppenheimer played was honestly terrible. But how is that even possible? How can a game that we literally use as the ultimate test of human brainpower be played so poorly by two of the greatest minds to ever walk the earth?
Well, believe it or not, their massive intellect was actually their fatal flaw. See, Einstein and Oppenheimer sat at that board and tried to play chess by relying purely on raw intelligence. They looked at the 16 pieces on their side and tried to calculate, predict, and counter every single possible scenario their opponent might throw at them using nothing but brute brainpower. They treated a game of chess like it was a physics problem they could just compute on the fly. But, as our source brilliantly points out, doing that is completely mathematically impossible.
To show you why predicting the future like this is a fool's errand, just look at how fast the game spirals into an absolute mathematical nightmare. When white makes its first move, there are 20 possible board states. Simple enough, right? By move 2, we're at 400. Maybe still manageable for a genius. But look at how this explodes. Move 3, over 5,000. Move 4 is over 71,000. By the time you're just trying to predict move 5, you literally have to account for over 809,000 unique states. And by move 6, you're staring at almost 4.9 million possible variations. The complexity scales exponentially.
Let me really drive this point home for you. If you try to calculate all the possible game states in a full match of chess, that number actually exceeds the total number of atoms in the known universe. Our source notes that not even the world's most powerful cutting-edge supercomputers can calculate every single possible outcome. So if prediction is mathematically impossible, how on earth are chess grandmasters winning? They definitely aren't calculating billions of alternate futures in their heads.
The secret is, they don't predict the future at all. Instead, they rely on what the source calls ground rules, or what chess players call openings. A ground rule is just a set of foundational principles and fixed early moves. When a grandmaster sits down to play, they honestly do not care what their opponent is planning for the first few moves. They just execute a predetermined sequence. They move 3 to 5 pieces into very specific spots because history and millions of past games have proven that doing this naturally builds an ironclad defense and sets up an attack. It completely eliminates the need to guess or predict the opponent's strategy.
Let's look at a few of these actual chess ground rules the source mentions. Things like always try to control the 4 center squares of the board. Castle early, which just means swapping your king and your rook to get the king safely tucked away. Always ensure your rooks have a clear line of sight to each other so they can defend one another. And as a general rule, value your rooks, which are essentially worth 5 points, over your knights, which are worth 3. Now, there is a built-in exception rule here. If the board gets closed off and cluttered, knights suddenly become way more valuable because they can literally jump over the traffic. By blindly following these basic rules, your pieces are automatically protected. You've essentially built a fortress on autopilot.
Okay, so why are we spending all this time talking about chess in an explainer about business? Because we need to cross the bridge from the chessboard directly to business strategy. The really profound insight from our source material today is that the business world is governed by the exact same underlying mechanics as that chessboard. But just like Einstein trying to compute 4 million chess moves in his head, most business owners are out there trying to compute and predict every single possible problem.
And that creates a pretty stark contrast in how people operate. Most business owners are living this exhausting reality of fighting exceptions. Every single day, a brand new, totally unique problem pops up, and they waste all their energy, time, and focus reacting to it. It's totally problem-focused and draining. But relying on ground rules brings simplified success. Just like on the chessboard, if you adhere to foundational business rules, you are proactive.
The source claims that if you implement the right ground rules, it naturally eliminates like 90% of your daily unique business problems before they ever even happen.
So, let's look at a concrete example. Business ground rule number 1, be scarce.
Now, being scarce sounds simple, right? Almost too simple. But let's actually break down the incredibly powerful automatic chain reaction that happens when you execute this one single rule. Notice the domino effect here. Step 1, you introduce scarcity into your business model. Automatically, step 2 kicks in. The perceived value of your product or service goes way up because it's hard to get. That triggers step 3. Customer demand and desire rise. We all know people desperately want what they can't easily have, and that gets them talking about you, which naturally leads to step 4. Because you are now in high demand and scarce, you can command premium pricing, and you end up establishing a fiercely loyal brand tribe. By making just one proactive move, being scarce, you naturally solve up to 20 different business problems, from marketing to pricing to customer retention, all without having to predict a single one of them.
Now moving on to business ground rule number 2, do not discount.
I know. When sales are a little slow, the natural reflex is to just drop the price, right? But the source explicitly warns against this reflex, highlighting a strict no-discount policy as an absolutely fundamental ground rule if you want massive profitability. Let's look at both sides. If you choose to discount, sure, you might get a quick, short-term sales spike, but what are you left with? Low margins and low credibility. You basically give away your most powerful sales catalyst. But when you flat out refuse to discount, you are literally forced to create actual value. Initially, yeah, your volume of sales might take a dip, but because you can't just rely on slapping a cheap price tag on things to make a sale, you have to solve real problems. You have to build true brand credibility. The source points out that by aggressively sticking to this one rule, you naturally attract wealthier clients and create way higher margins. You end up with far more profitable sales than if you just run a discount.
And the beautiful thing is, just like in chess, these rules offer incredible built-in protection. In chess, there's this famous trap known as the fool's mate. It's where a beginner makes the absolute wrong moves and literally gets checkmated in just 2 turns. It's completely embarrassing. But if you just play a standard opening ground rule, you are naturally protected from the fool's mate without even actively thinking about it. Business ground rules work the exact same way. They naturally steer you away from these catastrophic, unseen traps in the market without you ever having to lose sleep over predicting them.
Our source actually shares this fantastic personal anecdote that perfectly illustrates this. The speaker talks about a friend who owned a business and was just endlessly complaining about complex, daily management nightmares. Fast forward, the speaker starts their own business, scales it up to dozens of employees, but they didn't experience any of those same nightmares. Why? Was it because they were some psychic genius at predicting employee behavior? No way. It was entirely because they had established the right ground rules from day one. By strictly sticking to the rules, they automatically bypassed all those complex management issues. Interestingly, the source points out that this concept isn't just for small businesses, it scales all the way up to the national level. It neutrally observes this in macro management, using Iran as an example of a system facing endless, multiplying crises. According to the source's analysis, this happens because decision-makers are basically wasting all their time and energy fighting exceptions, running around putting out unique individual fires rather than establishing strong foundational ground rules that would have prevented those exceptions from popping up in the first place.
So you're probably wondering, how many of these rules do I actually need to memorize to be successful? Well, the source makes a pretty staggering claim here. It says you don't need 1,000 complex interconnected strategies. Mastering just 5 core business rules is enough to set up a foundation that generates massive, predictable monthly income. The source specifically states a target of hitting 10 billion tomans, the Iranian currency, per month simply by mastering and properly interpreting these 5 basic laws.
Now I get it. You might be sitting there thinking, okay, but I don't fully understand why these rules work yet. And that brings us to this brilliant concept from the source: action before understanding. Back to the chessboard, your opening rule might tell you to put your bishop in one very specific spot. In the moment, you might have no idea why, but 40 moves later, you realize that bishop is sitting in the exact perfect position to win you the game. It's the same in business. You don't need to completely understand the deep underlying philosophy of these ground rules right now. You literally just need to execute them. The profound benefits are going to reveal themselves long after you make the move. Which leads us to a pretty provocative choice. Look, ground rules are born from millions of painful failures and experiences. So you really have 2 options. You can either spend decades of your own life failing, struggling through the brutal trial and error to figure out these business rules all by yourself, or you can completely bypass that painful struggle by just learning them directly from someone who already has.